The twin suns of Zarion shone over the wide stone courtyard of the royal palace. The walls were high and covered with silver banners that moved slowly in the wind. Inside the grand hall, King Torque sat on his throne, his heavy armor shining under. The bright light round him stood guards, ministers, and a few visitors from other worlds. Among them was a human named Paul. Paul had been sent to Zarion as part of a trade mission. He had no titles, no wealth, and no weapons. He was not a warrior, but he had spent years traveling between worlds, fixing problems for different colonies. He was known for his clever ideas and calm nature. This time, however, his visit had taken an unexpected turn. The king spoke in a deep voice, his sharp eyes fixed on Paul. "Human, I have a task for you," Torque said. "My daughter, Princess Mira, is weak. She is the only heir to the throne, yet she cannot run far, cannot lift a sword, and tires quickly. Many trainers have tried to make her strong, and all have failed. I want you to train her." The words caused a stir in the hall. Some ministers whispered to each other, confused. Others frowned. A guard near the door shook his head. Paul was surprised. "Your Majesty, I'm not a soldier," he said carefully. "Why choose me?" The king's expression was firm. "Because you are not like the others. I have seen you. You think before you act. You find a way when others say there is none. My daughter needs more than drills and orders. She needs belief. You will give it to her." Paul knew that refusing a king was dangerous. But more than that, he felt something in the king's voice. There was worry hidden behind the strength. Paul agreed. "I will try," he said. The king called for Meridat when she entered the hall. Paul saw a young alien girl with pale blue skin and bright green eyes. Her steps were slow, and her hands were thin. She wore a silver robe, and her long dark hair was tied neatly, but her eyes seemed unsure, as if she expected to fail before trying anything. She stood beside her father, her gaze on the floor. "This is Paul," the king said to her. "He will be your new trainer." Mira gave a small bow but did not speak. Later, Paul was taken to the palace gardens where he and Mira would begin. The air was warm, and tall crystal trees cast cool shadows over the grass. Mira stood with her arms crossed. "You will be another one who tries and leaves," she said quietly. "It always happens." Paul smiled a little. "Maybe, but we will see. I am not going to start with heavy swords or long runs. Today, we just walk." She blinked. "Walk. Yes, from here to the edge of the garden and back. Slow. Steady. No rush." Mira looked confused but followed him. At first, she walked with small, tired steps. Paul kept talking as they moved, telling her short stories of his travels, about a planet where the ground floated in the air, about a desert where water was hidden under stones. Without noticing, she began to take longer steps. When they returned to the starting point, Mira's breathing was a little faster, but she was smiling faintly. "That is all for today." Paul said. "That was easy," she said. "It should be easy. First, we make the mind ready, then the body will follow." In the following days, they walked a little more each time. Sometimes they did simple stretches under the trees. Sometimes Paul asked her to balance on a low stone wall while tossing a ball back and forth. He called these games, but each one trained her muscles, her balance, and her focus. The palace staff watched with raised eyebrows. "This is not warrior training," one guard said to another. "He is making her play like a child." But Paul ignored the comments. He could see small changes. Mira's shoulders were no longer always bent forward. She began to ask questions about his stories. She laughed sometimes during training. One afternoon, while they were balancing on the stone wall, Mira said, "When I was younger, the trainers shouted at me. They made me carry heavy stones until I fell. They said I was useless. I started to believe them." Paul caught the ball she threw and nodded. "That is why they failed. They trained only your body and forgot your mind. A warrior needs both." She looked at him for a moment and then said softly, "Do you think I can be a warrior?" Paul tossed the ball back to her. "I think you can be more than that." The king sometimes came to watch, standing silently at a distance. He said nothing, but his eyes followed Mira closely. One day, after training, he spoke to Paul. Her face looks different, the king said. She stands taller. But will she be ready when danger comes? She will, Paul answered. But she needs time. Time, however, was something the court did not like to give. The ministers began to pressure the king again. We need to see results, they said. The princess must be strong enough to lead. She must hold a sword and ride in the army. The king did not answer them. But Paul could feel the growing tension. One evening, as the sun set behind the crystal trees, Mira said, Paul, they are talking about replacing you. Paul looked at her. Do you want me to leave? Her voice was firm for the first time. No. Then we keep going, Paul said. Let them talk. You and I have work to do. That night, Paul planned new training for the next day. He knew the real test had not yet come, but he also knew something important. Mira had stopped saying I can't, and that, he thought, was the first true victory. The palace gardens were quiet in the early morning. A thin layer of mist hung over the grass, and the crystal trees glowed faintly in the light of the twin suns. Paul arrived before sunrise. As he had planned, he wanted to see if Mira would keep her promise to train every day. She did. Mira was already there, stretching her arms and legs. Her face was still pale, but her eyes were more awake than before. When she saw Paul, she gave a small nod. You are early, Paul said. I wanted to be ready, she replied. That simple answer made Paul smile. A few weeks ago, she would have been late, tired, and unwilling to move. Now she was waiting for him. It was a small change, but a powerful one. They began the day with their usual walk around the gardens, then added a few new exercises. Paul asked Mira to carry small sandbags in each hand while walking. They were not heavy, but enough to make her arms work harder. This feels strange, Mira said after a few minutes. Strange is good, Paul replied. It means your body is learning something new. As they trained, servants passed by, whispering to each other. Some smiled at Mira's effort. Others still doubted. One guard muttered, when will she pick up a real weapon? Walking will not save a kingdom. Paul heard him, but kept silent. He knew it was too soon for swords or heavy armor. First, Mira had to build her balance, stamina, and trust in herself. Later that day, Paul decided to try something different. He brought a long wooden pole, lighter than a sword, and handed it to Mira. This is not for fighting, he explained. It is for control. Hold it in front of you and keep it steady as you walk. Mira looked doubtful, but she obeyed. At first, the pole wobbled in her hands, making her steps unsteady. Paul taught her to breathe slowly and focus on the weight. In her grip. By the end of the path, she was more stable. This is harder than it looks, she admitted. That is the point, Paul said. Days turned into weeks. Paul made each training session a little harder than the last. They walked longer distances, balanced on narrow beams, and practiced quick side steps. Mira began to sweat during training, something that had never happened before. Her breathing grew stronger, her steps firmer. But not everyone was pleased. One afternoon, as Paul and Mira finished their exercises, Minister Korth approached. He was a tall alien with sharp features and a cold voice. This is the Princess of Zarion, not a child in a human playground, Korth said. We need her to lead the army, not play games. Mira's shoulders tensed, but Paul stepped forward. She will be ready, Paul said calmly. When, Korth asked, the border grows restless. If she cannot defend herself, she is a danger to the throne. Paul looked him in the eyes. You can rush her and break her, or give her time and see her rise. Choose wisely. Korth gave a short laugh and walked away, muttering to himself. Mira let out a slow breath. They do not believe in me. They will, Paul said. You just have to believe in yourself first. That evening, Paul decided it was time to test Mira's progress. He took her to the palace's small training yard, where several guards were practicing with wooden sticks. The guards looked surprised to see the princess step onto the dirt floor. She will join your drill, Paul told them. One of the guards, a young warrior named Raylan, grinned. Very well, but did not expect her to last long. The drill was simple: dodge a slow strike from the stick and step aside quickly. At first, Mira hesitated and moved late, getting tapped on the arm. But Paul encouraged her to watch the guard's shoulders and read his movement dot by the fourth try. Mira avoided the strike completely. By the sixth, she moved before the stick even came close. The guards exchanged surprised looks. Not bad, Raylan admitted. After the drill, Mira's face was glowing with pride. I did not think I could do that, she said. Paul nodded. That is because you were thinking about what you could not do, instead of what you could. The next few days brought more challenges. Paul asked her to carry a basket of stones across the garden without dropping any. Then he made her climb the low palace walls, which tested her grip and balance. She fell a few times, but each time she got up faster than before. One morning, heavy clouds covered the sky and rain began to fall. Paul still called her to the training yard. In the rain? Mira asked, looking at the wet ground. In the rain, Paul said firmly. A warrior cannot wait for perfect weather. They practiced running short distances and stopping without slipping. The wet ground made it harder, but Mira began to enjoy the challenge. When the rain finally stopped, she was soaked but smiling. You are strange, she told Paul, and you are getting stronger, he replied. Still, there were moments when doubt returned. One evening, after a long day, Mira sat on a bench under the crystal trees. What if they are right? She asked quietly. What if I can never be strong enough? Paul sat beside her. Do you know what makes a fighter? Strength? She guessed. No, Paul said. It is the decision to keep standing after you fall. Strength comes later. Mira looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. The next week, Paul arranged a small test without telling Mira. He asked one of the palace guards to pretend to challenge her during training, stepping in her way and blocking her path. Mira did not hesitate. She sidestepped quickly and kept moving forward without losing balance. Paul smiled. She had reacted without fear. That evening, the king summoned Paul to his private chamber. Torque listened as Paul described Mira's progress. She is not ready for battle, Paul admitted, but she is ready to start real weapon training. Her body and mind are stronger. The king's eyes softened. If you can do this, human, you will have given Zarian a true leader. Paul left the chamber knowing the real work was about to begin. Mira's journey had moved from walking in the gardens to stepping onto the training ground. The first steps to strength had been taken, and there was no turning back. The palace training yard was busy that morning. Warriors in silver armor practiced sword drills, their blades flashing under the bright suns. The sound of steel striking steel echoed across the stone walls. Mira stood at the edge of the yard, holding a wooden training sword for the first time. Paul watched her carefully. It had taken weeks to get to this point. Her hands were stronger now, her balance better, and her movements quicker. But holding a weapon was a new challenge. Remember, Paul said, it is not about swinging with all your strength. It is about control. Mira nodded and stepped forward to face her opponent, a young palace guard named Varek. He bowed politely before taking his stance. The match was meant to be simple, a light spar to help her learn the basics. At first, Mira did well. She blocked the first few slow strikes, moving her feet just as Paul had taught her. But then Varek moved a little faster, and her rhythm broke. She stumbled, and the tip of his sword touched her shoulder. You lose, Varek said gently. Mira's face tightened. Again, she said. They tried a second time. This time, she lasted longer, but was struck on the leg. On the third try, she dropped her sword completely. The guards watching from the side began to whisper. She is not ready, one said. This is wasting time, another muttered. Paul saw the doubt growing in Mira's eyes. He stepped forward. Before the match could continue, that is enough for today, he said. Mira looked at him, frustrated. No, I can do it. I just need one more try. Paul shook his head. Pushing too hard now will only make you lose focus. We will train more and come back. They left the yard in silence. Mira's steps were quick and tense, her hands clenched. When they reached the quiet of the gardens, she finally spoke. I failed. She said no. Paul replied, "You learn where you need to improve. That is not failure." She shook her head. They were laughing. Paul stopped and faced her. Let them laugh. A true fighter ignores the crowd. But deep inside, Paul knew this would be a turning point. If Mira lost confidence now, all their progress could fade. Over the next few days, Paul adjusted their training. He brought out lighter swords so she could practice faster strikes without tiring too quickly. He added footwork drills, making her step through patterns on the ground while keeping her balance. They also returned to reaction exercises, tossing small stones at her feet for her to dodge quickly. One afternoon, as they trained, Minister Korth appeared again. His sharp eyes studied Mira for a long moment before he spoke. King Torek wants results, he said. The princess must be ready to fight in the arena next month. Paul frowned. An arena fight? That is too soon. The people must see her strength. Korth insisted. If they do not, they will question her right to the throne. When he left, Mira looked uneasy. An arena fight? I cannot win. Paul placed a hand on her shoulder. Do not think about winning. Think about surviving. That will be enough for now. But the pressure had already begun to show. Mira became more tense in training, making small mistakes she had already mastered. Once, during a drill, she dropped her sword and almost tripped over it. She cursed under her breath, something she rarely did stop. Paul said firmly, "You are thinking about them, not the fight. They are all waiting for me to fail," she said. "Then give them a surprise." Paul replied to lift her spirit. Paul decided to change the scenery. One morning, he took her outside the palace walls, to a nearby hill. The climb was steep, and the wind was strong, but the view from the top showed the wide valley and the river winding through it. This, Paul said, is your kingdom. Every step you take in training is for them, not for the ministers, not for the crowd, for the people who cannot fight for themselves. Mira looked out at the valley for a long time. I will try, she said quietly. From that day, her focus slowly returned. Paul taught her new tactics, using speed to make up for lack of strength, striking only when the opponent left an opening, and using the environment to her advantage. He even had her train against the guards at once, forcing her to think quickly. Still, the whispers in the palace did not stop. On the morning of a small public demonstration, Paul could see that Mira was nervous again. The courtyard was full of onlookers, and several ministers stood watching from the balcony. The match began. Mira faced a guard with a wooden sword. At first, she blocked his strikes well, moving lightly on her feet. But when he feinted left and struck from the right, she reacted too slowly and got tapped on the arm. A murmur ran through the crowd. Her next mistake came faster. She stepped back too far, lost her balance, and fell. The crowd's whispers grew louder. Paul stepped forward and ended the match. He could see the disappointment in Mira's eyes. She left the courtyard quickly, avoiding everyone's gaze. That evening, she sat in the gardens. Silent, Paul joined her without speaking at first. The sound of the fountains filled the quiet. They will never respect me, Mira said at last. They will, Paul answered. But first you must respect yourself. She looked at him. How? By refusing to quit. Paul said simply, every great warrior has days like this. The difference is, they keep going. Mira didn't answer, but she stayed in the gardens with him until the sun set. In the days that followed, Paul noticed something. Even though she was still troubled, she did not skip a single training session. She made mistakes, but she also recovered faster. And though she did not smile as much, there was a new fire in her eyes, a stubbornness he had not seen before. Paul knew this was the beginning of something important. Mira was learning the hardest lesson of all, how to keep fighting when the world wanted her to stop. The palace felt tense that week. News had arrived that a group of armed raiders had been seen near the border villages. They had not attacked yet, but their movements were suspicious. The royal guard prepared for patrols, and the generals met with King Torek to plan their response. Mira listened to the talk from a distance. She wanted to be part of the patrols, to prove that her training meant something. When Paul found her in the hallway, She spoke before he could even greet her. "I want to join the patrol," she said firmly. Paul studied her face. "This is not practice in the gardens. Out there, the danger is real." "I know," she replied. "But if I stay here, they will keep saying I am weak. I need to show them." Paul hesitated. She was not ready for open battle, but a patrol was different. If handled carefully, it could be her chance to prove herself without facing the full force of combat. Later that day, Paul went to the king. "Your Majesty, let the princess join the patrol," he suggested. "She can take a non-combat role, watch, report, and help the soldiers spot trouble." The king frowned. "If she is harmed, she will not be," Paul promised. "I will be with her." After a long pause, Torque agreed. The next morning, the patrol gathered outside the palace gates. Mira wore light armor that fit her frame, a short sword at her side. She mounted a small desert runner, a swift, four-legged beast used for travel, and lined up with the others. The guards exchanged glances, some doubtful, some curious. Paul rode beside her. "Remember, your eyes are your best weapon today," he said. They set off toward the open plains. The suns were high, and the wind carried the scent of dry grass. The land stretched far and wide, broken only by rocky hills and scattered trees. For hours, they saw nothing unusual, but Mira kept scanning the horizon. As they neared a narrow pass between two cliffs, Mira noticed something. A faint glint, like sunlight on metal, flashed from the rocks above. "Stop," she called out. The lead guard turned. "What is it?" She pointed toward the cliff. "Up there, something moved." The guards stared but saw nothing at first. Paul trusted her instincts. "We check it," he said. Two soldiers climbed the rocks while the others waited. Moments later, they signaled back. There was an ambush ahead. Hidden raiders had been preparing to strike when the patrol entered the pass. The guards quickly changed their route, avoiding the trap. Thanks to Mira's sharp eyes, the patrol returned to the palace without injury. That evening, in the great hall, the captain of the guard reported the incident to the king. "It was the princess who saw the danger," the captain said. "Without her warning, we might have lost men." The king's stern expression softened. He looked at Mira with pride. "Well done," he said. The news spread through the palace. Some who had doubted her began to see her differently. Even Minister Korth, though silent, could not hide his surprise when he passed her in the hallway. The next day, Paul and Mira returned to training with renewed energy. "You see," Paul said, "you have more than strength. You have awareness. That is just as important." Mira smiled faintly. It felt good. "Not just because they noticed, but because I helped." "That feeling," Paul said, "is what will keep you moving forward." He decided it was time to challenge her more. They began practicing with a shield, teaching her to block and move. At the same time, he also introduced night training in the dim torchlight of the palace courtyard. The shadows made it harder to judge movement, forcing her to rely on sound and instinct. During one of these night sessions, the king came to watch. He stood quietly in the shadows as Mira blocked a series of strikes from Paul, her movements quick and steady. When the session ended, the king approached. "You are different from the girl I saw months ago," Torque said. "Your mother would be proud." Mira bowed her head. "I still have much to learn, father." "That is the mark of a true warrior," the king said. But not everyone was pleased with her progress. Some in the court still believed her skills came only from Paul's protection. Whispers began again, that without him, she would not last. In a real fight, Paul heard the whispers too, but he did not rush to silence them. He knew a day was coming when Mira would have to stand on her own. That day came sooner than expected. A week later, a messenger arrived with urgent news. A group of raiders had been spotted, moving toward the river settlement just outside the capital. The guard was sent to intercept them. Mira stood beside Paul as the orders were given. "I want to go," she said. Paul met her eyes. "This time, there may be fighting." "I know," she replied. The king hesitated but finally agreed, on the condition that Paul stay close to her. They set out at once, riding hard toward the river. By the time they arrived, the raiders had already fled, leaving signs of their approach but no battle. The villagers thanked the patrol for their speed. Though no swords were drawn, Mira had been there, ready, and in the eyes of the guards, that mattered, back at the palace. Paul saw the change in how the soldiers looked at her. There was less doubt now, more respect. You are earning their trust, Paul told her. Piece by piece, Mira stood a little taller. Then I will keep going until there is no doubt left. Paul knew this was the turning point he had been waiting for. The girl who once avoided the training grounds was now riding into danger without fear. The next challenge would not be about proving she could stand in a patrol. It would be about showing she could fight when it truly counted. And that test, he thought, was not far away. The news spread quickly through the palace. Princess Mira had been challenged to fight in the royal arena. It was not a fight to the death, but it would be public, and the whole city would watch. Her opponent was a young warrior named Draven, known for his skill and speed. He had never lost in the training matches. Paul heard the news from a guard in the courtyard. They say it was Draven's idea, the guard said. He wants to see if the princess can truly fight, or if she only has stories to her name. Paul found Mira in the training yard, practicing with her wooden sword. Her strikes were sharper than before, but there was tension in her shoulders. You heard? Paul asked. She nodded. Everyone has. If I refuse, they will say I am afraid. If I fight and lose badly, they will say I am not ready. Paul studied her expression. Then we make sure that if you lose well, and if you win with skill. For the next several days, training became harder. Paul focused on speed, reaction, and reading the opponent's movements. He had her spar with 3 different guards in a row, each with a different style. He made her fight while tired, forcing her to think even when her body was heavy. Do not fight his strength. Paul reminded her. Fight his mind, make him think you are open, then strike when he commits. The day of the match arrived. The royal arena was a wide, circular space with high walls, filled with rows of spectators. The banners of Zarion hung from the stands, and the roar of the crowd shook. The heir. Mira stepped into the arena wearing light armor and holding a polished wooden sword. Across from her, Draven stood tall, his confident smile clear for all to see. The announcer's voice rang out, introducing both fighters. When the horn sounded, Draven moved first. His strikes were quick and heavy, forcing Mira to step back. The crowd cheered at his speed. Paul watched from the edge of the arena, his eyes never leaving her feet and hands. Mira blocked the first 2 strikes, but barely avoided the third. She remembered Paul's advice and began to move in circles, forcing Draven to adjust his stance. His swings were strong, but each one took energy. She let him press forward, waiting for the right moment. Draven grew impatient and tried to end the match with a heavy overhead strike. Mira stepped aside at the last second, and his sword hit the ground with a dull thud. She struck his side quickly before stepping back. The crowd gasped. Draven's smile faded. He attacked faster now, but Mira was ready. She dodged, blocked, and landed to more clean strikes. The fight was even. Paul could see that Draven was beginning to tire. Mira's light armor and quick footwork gave her an advantage. Still, Draven was dangerous. One mistake could end the match. On the next exchange, Draven feinted left and swung right. Mira barely blocked in time, feeling the force shake her arm. But instead of retreating, she stepped forward and struck his wrist, making him drop his sword for a moment. The crowd erupted in cheers. Mira stepped back, letting him recover his weapon. The respect in Draven's eyes was clear now. The fight continued for several more exchanges until the final horn sounded. The match was judged on points, and the score was announced. Mira had won by a single point. The arena exploded with noise. Some shouted her name, others clapped. And even those who had doubted her now looked impressed. Draven removed his helmet and bowed. You fight well, princess, he said. You have earned my respect. Mira bowed in return. And you have my thanks. Paul felt a rare warmth in his chest as he watched her leave the arena. She walked with steady steps, her head held high. This was no longer the same girl he had met months ago. That evening, the king called for a feast in her honor. Warriors and ministers gathered in the great hall. sharing food and drink. Minister Korath, who had once openly doubted her, approached and gave a short nod. "You fought well," he said simply before walking away. Paul leaned toward Mira. "That might be the closest thing to a compliment you will get from him." Mira smiled. "It is enough." But even as they enjoyed the celebration, Paul knew this victory was only one step. Beyond the palace walls, the enemy threat was growing. The arena had tested her skill. Soon, real battle would test her courage. Over the next week, Mira's training changed again. Now that she had proven herself in the arena, Paul began to prepare her for group combat. She practiced fighting alongside others, learning how to protect her allies and watch the battlefield for danger. They studied maps of the kingdom, marking possible routes for enemy attacks. One night, while they worked under the torchlight, a messenger arrived from the border. His voice was urgent. "The scouts have seen movement from the Krone forces," he said. "They are gathering for war." The king wasted no time. The royal council met the next morning, and for the first time, Mira was invited to join. Paul sat beside her as the general spoke of troop numbers, supplies, and defenses. When the king asked for suggestions, Mira surprised everyone by speaking up. "We should not wait for them to attack the capital," she said. "We must strengthen the river crossings and watch the northern hills. They will try to strike where our guard is weakest." The generals exchanged glances, but no one dismissed her words. The king nodded slowly. "We will consider your plan." As they left the council room, Paul spoke quietly. "You are not just fighting battles now. You are shaping them." Mira looked ahead, her expression calm. "That is what a leader should do." Paul realized something then. The girl who once feared the training yard was gone. In her place stood a warrior, tested by challenge and strengthened by will. And soon, the true test would come. The day of the challenge arrived, and the air around the alien palace felt heavy with tension. The sun of Valoria was bright, casting golden light across the massive training arena where warriors from across the kingdom had gathered. Stands were filled with spectators, alien nobles, soldiers, and citizens, each eager to see if the king's fragile daughter would truly fight. Many still doubted her. Some whispered that this was only for show, that she would forfeit before the first strike. But those who had seen her train knew something had changed. Talon stood by the edge of the arena, watching her prepare. Her armor was light but strong, made from the kingdom's finest steel. Her sword, balanced perfectly for her hands, gleamed under the sun. She looked calm, though her eyes were sharp and alert. "You remember what I told you?" Talon asked quietly as he adjusted the strap on her shoulder guard. "Yes," she replied firmly. "I fight to win. I fight for myself, for my father, and for my people." He nodded, pride swelling in his chest. "Good. But remember, winning is not just about strength. It's about knowing when to move, when to defend, and when to strike." The sound of a horn echoed, signaling the start of the match. Leora stepped into the arena. Her opponent, a tall alien warrior named Drevin, was one of the kingdom's strongest fighters. His armor was heavier, and his weapon was a long spear tipped with glowing energy. The crowd cheered loudly for him, while only a few clapped for El Iware. Drive Evan smirked. "Princess, I hope you know what you're doing. I will not go easy on you." Leora held her sword steady. "Good. I don't want you to." The match began with Drevin charging forward. His spear lunged toward her chest, but Leora sidestepped quickly, letting the attack miss by inches. She swung her sword in a clean arc, aiming for his side, but Drevin blocked it with the shaft of his spear. Sparks flew as the weapons clashed. The crowd gasped at her speed. Drevin's eyes narrowed. He had not expected such agility. He attacked again, this time with a series of quick thrusts. Leora blocked and dodged, her movements sharp and efficient. She could hear Talon's voice in her mind, reminding her to stay calm, to control the rhythm of the fight. Minutes passed, and Drevin began to grow frustrated. His heavy armor slowed him down, while Leora's light gear let her move freely. She darted in, landing a shallow cut on his arm. The crowd roared, some in surprise, others in disbelief. "You've improved," Drevin admitted, his tone less mocking now. "And I'm not done yet," she said, stepping back to create space. They circled each other. Drevin made a sudden feint, pretending to aim for her leg, then swung the spear at her head. But Lior reacted instantly, ducking low and striking his side with the flat of her sword. The force made him stumble. Talon's eyes lit up. She was not only holding her own, she was controlling the fight, but Drevin was still dangerous. With a roar, he swung his spear in a wide arc, forcing her to leap back. His next strike knocked her sword from her hands, sending it clattering across the arena floor. Gasps echoed through the crowd. For a moment, Drevin thought it was over. But Leora didn't freeze. She rolled to the side, grabbed her weapon, and rose to her feet in one fluid motion. Her eyes burned with determination. "You won't break me," she said. Her voice carrying across the arena. With a burst of speed, she rushed forward. Drevin tried to block, but she twisted her blade at the last second, striking the shaft of his spear hard enough to knock it from his grip. The crowd erupted into shouts and cheers as Drevin stood weaponless instead of attacking recklessly. Leora held her sword ready but waited. Drevin, breathing heavily, stepped back and bowed his head. "I yield." The horn sounded, ending the match. Silence fell for a heartbeat before the stands exploded with applause. The same people who doubted her now cheered her name. The king stood from his seat, his proud smile visible even from the arena floor. Talon walked over to her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You fought like a true warrior." She smiled, breathing hard but feeling stronger than ever. "I had the best teacher." As the crowd celebrated, a messenger rushed into the arena, his expression urgent. He bowed before the king and spoke loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "Your Majesty, scouts report enemy warships entering our space. They will be here within days." The joy in the arena shifted to tension. The celebration was over. A real battle was coming. And this time, it would not be for sport, it would be for survival. Leora looked at Talon. "Then I'll fight again. But this time, for all of Valoria." Talon nodded. "Then we prepare." The king stepped forward, his voice strong. "The princess will lead alongside our best warriors. Let the enemy see that Valoria is not weak." The people cheered again, but now with a fierce, united energy. For the first time, they truly believed in their princess. Leora gripped her sword tightly, ready for the challenge ahead. The training, the hardships, the years of doubt, they had all led to this moment. She was no longer the fragile child the galaxy thought she was. She was a fighter, and she was ready. The sky above the palace city was covered with dark clouds. The ground trembled as distant roars echoed through the valleys. It was the final day, the moment everything had been leading toward. Mira stood on the highest terrace of the royal palace, her armor shining under the pale light. Her eyes were calm but strong. She had come far from the weak girl who could not lift a wooden sword. Now she was the shield of her people. Ryan stood beside her. He looked proud, but his voice was steady. "Today will be the hardest fight you have ever faced. But you are ready. No one can take away what you have become." The news had come at dawn. A warlord from the northern stars had crossed into their world with a massive army. His forces moved like a tide, crushing villages and capturing towns. The alien king had sent messengers to call every warrior to defend the capital. The final battle would decide the future of their world. Mira stepped forward and looked over the palace walls. Below, thousands of soldiers were gathering. Some were from the royal guard, others from distant provinces. They all carried the banner of the king. The air was heavy with the sound of drums and the cries of preparation. The alien king approached them. His face was lined with age, but his voice was strong. "Daughter," he said to Mira, "today you fight not only for the crown, but for every life in this land. I cannot lead this battle, for my strength fades. You must take command." Mira bowed her head in respect. "I will protect our people. I will not fail." The king looked at Ryan. "You have done what I could not. You gave her the strength of 1,000 warriors. Fight beside her one last time." The gates of the city opened, and the army marched out into the plains. The enemy waited beyond the river, their banners black and silver. At the center of their line stood the warlord, taller than most. his armor spiked and his weapon glowing red. His voice carried across the battlefield, "Surrender your city, and I will spare your people." Mira stepped forward, her voice ringing like a bell. "This is our home. We will never surrender." The battle began with the clash of steel and the roar of war beasts. Mira rode at the front, her sword cutting through the first wave. Her movements were sharp and controlled. She gave orders to the soldiers, moving them like a single living force. Ryan fought beside her, covering her side from sudden attacks. The warlord's army was fierce, but Mira's leadership turned the tide. She remembered every lesson Ryan had taught her: never waste strength, read the enemy's movement, and always protect those behind you. Her soldiers trusted her completely, and their courage grew with every command she gave. Hours passed. The plain was covered with smoke and dust. Finally, Mira saw the warlord cutting through her soldiers. She rode straight toward him, their swords meeting in a burst of sparks. His strength was great, but she was faster. Every strike she made was precise, forcing him back step by step. Ryan kept the enemy soldiers away, giving Mira the space she needed. The warlord grew angry, his attacks wild and heavy. Mira saw her chance. She dodged his final swing and struck his weapon arm. His blade fell to the ground. With a firm voice, she said, "Leave this land and never return." The warlord looked at her for a long moment, then signaled his army to retreat. The battle was over. The soldiers cheered, their voices rising like a storm. Mira stood still for a moment, breathing hard, but her eyes shone with quiet victory. When they returned to the city, the alien king welcomed them at the gates. He placed his crown on Mira's head, declaring her the protector of the realm. "You are not only my daughter," he said, "but the warrior who saved our people." That night, the city celebrated. Lights filled the streets, and songs of victory were sung. Ryan stood on the balcony, watching the stars. Mira joined him, her armor replaced by a simple robe. "It is strange," she said softly, "to think how far we have come. You were always meant for this." Ryan replied, "I only helped you see it." The wind carried the sound of laughter and music from the city below. Mira looked out at the horizon, knowing new challenges would come. But she was ready. She was no longer the weak girl she once was. She was a fighter, a leader, and a protector. And as long as Ryan stood by her side, there was nothing she could not face.